Last night, I saw Sinners, Ryan Coogler's new movie, in 70mm IMAX. I'm lucky enough to live in Los Angeles pretty close to the Universal CityWalk, which is one of 10 movie theaters in the whole world that are showing it on true IMAX film projection. It's how Ryan Coogler described it as 15 perf.
IMAX film cameras. Those cameras spin the film in a horizontal fashion, and they spin it using 15 perfs per frame.
I was really lucky to be able to snag a ticket to see it on early access opening night, one night before it opens to the public. And I was sitting there on AMC's website just refreshing the seat map over and over for like an hour every couple of minutes. And a seat would open up in like the very first row, the worst seat possible, especially for a huge screen. A seat would open up in row 3 or like all the way to the left-hand side or the right-hand side. Eventually, I refreshed the page. Someone had canceled their ticket in the very back row, pretty close to the center. Actually, one of the best seats for that particular movie theater because you don't have to move your head up and down or left or right to see the screen. It's just all within your field of view. I was lucky. I was able to grab it. Shout out to whoever wound up canceling their ticket. I got your seat. I had a great time. Thanks for that. In terms of Ryan Coogler's filmography, I've actually only ever seen Black Panther 1 and 2. I think that movies that are made under an umbrella like MCU that tend to wind up being like their movies that are made by committee and just pretty standard, mundane, and boring. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Ryan Coogler's movies feel like they were actually made with an artistic vision to tell a story in an interesting way. And you can really feel the filmmaker's stamp on those movies as opposed to something like Ant-Man 3. Based on the strength of those movies in the MCU and Ryan Coogler's overall prestige, I was excited to see Sinners. After having seen it and talked about it with some of my buddies, I realized that it actually really wasn't as marketed as much as it feels like it was in my mind, because when you look at the seat map for the IMAX showings for yesterday, like I said, it was all sold out. Tonight, Thursday, all sold out. Friday through the rest of the weekend, and even Monday during the day, it's all sold out. But I think that's probably because you have these film enthusiasts who are wanting to see it in true IMAX on the biggest screen possible, especially after that video that Ryan Coogler put out highlighting this particular movie theater as one of the 10 in the whole world that are showing it in this format. But aside from that, I don't know what kind of hype the movie has. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you have a movie that isn't marketed as heavily as something like the movies that I've seen trailers for over and over, going to the movies pretty much every single week for the last couple of months. I've seen trailers for Drop, Death of a Unicorn, Novocaine. I've seen those trailers so friggin' much that I feel like I've actually seen the movie already. And I was only excited for those movies to come out so I wouldn't have to see trailers for them anymore. In comparison, I've only ever seen a trailer for Sinners, maybe I can count on one hand. I think maybe it's a double-edged sword because you have this movie that needs to play well based maybe primarily on word of mouth, which I think will actually wind up being strong because I think the movie is really great. And it actually winds up helping in a way because there's a lot to the movie that can't really be described in a trailer, or at least I don't think should be described in a trailer. And not like there's some big twist or that you need to be going into it blind, but I think that a movie as layered and well executed as Sinners is should be experienced as blind as possible, because even without a spoiler moment or a big plot twist moment, a movie like this has the chance to unfold naturally as you watch in the theater for the first time without knowing much about it. And it only has the opportunity to do that once, the first time you go see it. And so I think that it's actually a good thing that it will live on the strength of its word of mouth as opposed to being like marketed in your face over and over. From what marketing does exist for Sinners, it primarily describes it and showcases it as a horror movie, which it is. But I think there's so much more to it than that, and that's evident when you go see it and let it unfold naturally. Horror winds up a small slice of what actually winds up being represented in the movie. It really feels much more like a period piece that uses horror as a vehicle to kind of drive some of the core themes, which I'll get into in a second. As a period piece, it's kind of a window into the life of the 1930s American Jim Crow South from the perspective specifically of the Black community. It's a topic that I have a pretty big blind spot, admittedly, in terms of the movies that I've seen that tell that story, or even the movies that I know exist to tell that story. And the closest comparison I can make for the look and feel of the setting are movies like The Assassination of Jesse James and something like The Power of the Dog. Those movies portray the early 1900s American South, but obviously from a white perspective, whereas Sinners is telling a Black perspective, something again that it's a blind spot for me. I'm not sure what else is out there. I'm certainly going to be seeking it out. But for me, very fresh and unique way to experience that slice of Americana. And there's a lot of beauty around it. And there's a lot that's celebrated about this perspective. And of course, it comes with that layer of tragedy. I don't know how else to put it. It's just tragic, of course, right? We all know that it was very heavily layered in racism and oppression, and it touches on those topics as well. But I think that it's much more a celebration and examination of Black experience from that time period. The period setting winds up being a launch pad for introducing the horror elements that eventually become part of the story. It is maybe a little misleading, but as close of a comparison as I can make is something like taking a few movies and combining them. Movies like Django Unchained, From Dusk Till Dawn, which I think is probably going to wind up being the primary movie that gets compared to this, and other movies like The Thing. It does take elements from those movies, but it's so much more than just a combination of elements from those movies, and it's not at all like watching someone who's just ripping off Tarantino or any of these other filmmakers who are making movies like this. It adds its own elements and it elevates itself above just being like an homage to those kinds of movies. One of the most unexpected aspects of the movie that I think helps elevate it beyond all of its influences and inspirations and anything that the marketing might reveal is how musical the movie is. And that's not to say that the movie is a musical by a traditional sense, but music does play a very core, important aspect to the narrative. And it's something that even when there's music that's not being played, you can feel the effects and the influence of music on the culture that's being portrayed in the movie. And it's felt the entire runtime and actually winds up being a pivotal part of the movie, even all the way to the very, very last scene. And side note, you should stay until the credits are completely over. And there's a scene around the halfway point that represents the movie's core central thesis around music and Black culture across generations. It's really, really powerful. I was grinning the whole time. It's very unique. It's somewhat unexpected, but as it's unfolding, it makes perfect sense. You'll 100% understand and know what I'm talking about when you see it. It drives home the point of, I think, what the movie is trying to say. It's unlike anything that I've seen in a long time. Because I saw the movie in 70mm IMAX, I think it's worth talking about how the movie ends up making use of the full frame of a full IMAX screen. It winds up having these moments where the image is shown in full IMAX 1:3:1 aspect ratio. It takes up the entire gigantic screen and it really just looks beautiful. The scenery, the landscape, the characters, even the indoor settings, it all just looks fantastic. I would say that if you've ever seen a Christopher Nolan movie in IMAX, like Oppenheimer, any of the Dark Knight movies, Interstellar, you know that sometimes the picture is shown full frame with, it's almost like a square or a tall rectangle. And then it cuts to these scenes where it's like standard widescreen. The only thing that stands out to me as being a little bit jarring is that sometimes you have these scenes that are shown in full frame IMAX that are really breathtaking, and then it cuts to the next scene, as it normally would in any theater or on your TV, and it's back to that sort of 276:1 standard widescreen format. It's not like the cut doesn't make sense or the edit doesn't make sense, but you can kind of feel it in a way where you are just aware that you're looking at a smaller size screen. It makes you wish that the whole movie could have been shot and shown in the 1:3:1 aspect ratio, but there's one scene in particular that takes advantage of the IMAX screen in a way that I've never seen done before. Usually when you see a movie in IMAX, there are some scenes that are full frame IMAX and then they cut to the next scene or the next shot that are in standard widescreen. In Sinners, there's one scene in particular that somewhere around the 3/4 point of the movie goes from widescreen and actively expands out into the full frame IMAX 70mm projection. If you see it in a standard widescreen format theater, you're probably just going to see the scene play out normally. You won't know that you're missing anything, but in IMAX, it's a very unique way that it adds an element of drama and anticipation for what's about to happen in the movie. it's worth going to see it in a large format IMAX theater for that unique experience as well. There's a lot of talk about how the movie theater experience is not what it once was and how movie theaters are dying. And I think that something like Sinners stands on its own as a movie, but also winds up contributing technically and through these unique IMAX experiences to warrant going to see it in an IMAX theater or even just in a theater in general. So aside from the technicals, like how it was shot and, the themes and aspects of the movie and aspects of the narrative, the performances are really strong. Michael B. Jordan is an obvious standout doing dual roles as twin brothers Smoke and Stack. Michael B. Jordan is the clear star of this movie in both roles, but all of the supporting characters and cast are doing a fantastic job. There's no one in the ensemble that feels like they're dragging anything behind. Typically in ensemble movies, you can kind of locate the weakest link. Nobody here is performing at anything other than their best and their peak. One of the aspects of delivering the story in a way that's as impactful as it is how authentic everything feels. And during the credits, I saw a number of roles that were attributed to period-specific consultants. So I think things like wardrobe, vocal coaching, all contribute to this feeling like it really is a glimpse into 1930s life, even despite the, fantastical horror elements that are present in the movie. It goes a long way when a filmmaker cares enough to get those things right. And you could absolutely feel that while watching Sinners. Everything just feels like the most amount of care was paid to getting it right. If you search YouTube for elevated horror, you'll find plenty of video essays by people who are antagonistic to that phrase. They believe that horror doesn't need to be elevated in order to tell an interesting story or to be taken seriously. I prefer a more cerebral horror movie experience that tells a story that can be considered multifaceted. I think Sinners does wind up falling into this genre of elevated horror, but I think there's still enough on display for the true core horror fans. Ultimately, it does wind up transcending its genre and being more of a blended, multifaceted, and layered movie, which I think is testament to its strength and will contribute to the fact that I think it's going to be talked about for a very long time and be considered a really great movie. Sinners is ultimately an excellent, thoughtful, well-crafted celebration and examination of Black culture, music, and legacy. It is a well-told story that I think is going to be talked about not only right now, but it's going to be talked about for the rest of the year. I think it's a really technical achievement. It's one of the first movies in a very long time that I think warrants going to see in theaters, especially in IMAX. It's the first truly great movie of 2025, and I think that it's going to stand the test of time against the rest of the year and in years to come. I think that there's not a lot of movies out there, at least for me, that I can anticipate coming out that will knock this out of a top 10, if not even top 3, or maybe even best of the entire year. I highly recommend it, and I'm really happy to talk about it. It's influenced me to sit here and talk to my camera and flood my lines over and over and do it over and over. Hopefully there's more to come. And if you sat through this and liked what I had to say or thought that it was interesting or influenced your decision in any way, then I really appreciate it. And that's all I have. Later.